Good evening and welcome to Wisdom Wednesday. It is good to be back this evening, and I am very excited for part three, which is part of our practical application section of this series on how to expand your capacity. Tonight, our topic is commit. Last week, our topic was focus. So I'm going to jump right into it because this is another night where you need a pen, a paper, a journal, a note on your app, if, on your phone, if that's where you are. But I highly encourage physical notes if you really want to know how to expand your own capacity. That's what we're here to do tonight. And I want everyone to get the benefit of what's going on. This is a series that has been as much for me as it has been for anyone else. And so I'm excited because not only am I learning and growing as I present, but I'm actually getting new realizations about things that I thought I understood as I have prepared these posts. And so I want to get right into it. Last week we talked about focus. The first week we talked about what capacity is and why it's so important. Tonight we're talking about what happens when you have taken what you thought you needed to be your focus, whether it's a business, getting married, buying a home, moving across the country, traveling, and you've presented that. If you are a God follower, and you guys know I'm unapologetically a God girl, you've presented that to God and you've said, hey, God, I wanted to expand my capacity in this area. Is this where you want me to expand my capacity? You've taken some time and you've actually looked at your life and you've looked at the way that you spend your time and the things that you do, and you've evaluated whether this thing, this goal that you have, is the goal that you should have, or is it just a goal that you had because it sounded good, or you thought it would be good because your parents always wanted you to be a doctor, or you always thought it would be fun to be an expat, but you've never really wanted it. You've just said you wanted it. That's what focus was about. I hope that you've taken the time to do that, because if you have, and I want to stop here for a minute because I feel like a lot of people get stuck here. They have many things that they want and desire to do, and in many cases those desires are competing. You want to get out of debt, but you're an extrovert and you want to go out with your friends every night. Those things are mutually inconsistent, right? Same thing with wanting to buy a home or wanting to be married. You're partying all the time. You're not going to meet the caliber of person that you want to meet. Or you're the opposite. Say you want to be married, but every day when you get off work, you drive directly to your house, order in and close your door, and you don't go anywhere where you might potentially meet anyone. Least of all church, where you arrive late, leave early, and speak to no one. I hope that I've covered everything in that little synopsis. The point of the focus segment, which was last week, if you did not watch it, I highly recommend that you go back and watch it if you're interested in increasing the capacity that you have. If you feel that there are goals or dreams, desires that you have that are not met and that you truly believe you want to meet, you need to understand whether your life is incompatible with it, one, and two, whether it is God's will for your life. And that was part of the inquiry that we did last week. And the homework and assignment for those who were able to be on last week was to figure out where you need to focus your increase in capacity. And I think that this is something that most people don't understand. There are seasons, as Ecclesiastes says, there is a time and a season for everything under the heavens. You cannot do everything at the same time. If you try, you will do nothing well. And so the reason that the exercise was to focus was to understand where you are in your life and what your true priorities are now, because there are things that you will have to leave behind to accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish in this season. That's what we're talking about tonight. Step 3, for those who are seeking to increase their capacity to accomplish a kingdom assignment or a lifetime goal or dream, you must commit. That's what we're here for tonight. And I want to specifically talk to you about why commitment is so important. The first reason commitment is so important is because This step is not about effort. It's not. This isn't about how hard you're going to work. It's not about what you're willing to sacrifice. It's about alignment. It's about making sure that the decisions that you're making for your entire life align with what your focus is in this season. When I went to graduate school, I had a season where I was so busy that I could do very, very little. And a big part of that meant, I didn't go out. I didn't have time to watch television. I didn't have time to hang out. And my husband and I, we did our date nights here and there and things like that. But I had to pull, I'm an introvert, so that was easy for me. But I had a good friend who was an extrovert. And she had also gone to undergrad in the same time. And she would always be fielding texts from her friends. Oh, meet us here. We're going to go do this. Do you want to watch this movie? Oh, just come by for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And we'd be in our little study group, 2 or 3 or 4 of us. And she would get the texts, get the messages. She'd be like, oh, guys, I'm going to go for an hour and I'll be back. Well, 3, 4 hours later, she would not be back. It's not my job to judge that. That's not my business. What is your business, though, is whether the life that you're living is in alignment with the goals that you have set in this season. Our text for tonight is Proverbs 16:3, commitment, right? It says, commit your ways to the Lord and he will establish your plans. And I think it's so important because many times, first of all, we love the idea of a pivot. There's nothing wrong with a pivot when it's necessary. We love the idea of a woman having the prerogative to change her mind. Again, nothing wrong with that. But too often we treat commitment like a test drive. We say yes, but with conditions. Yes, if I don't have to stop doing this. Yes, if I can continue doing this. Yes, and we put all of these conditions on it. And the thing about it is you can't have a backup plan. And you can't be tied to a timeline when you're on a kingdom assignment. Now, not every one of you will have a kingdom assignment as your ultimate purpose in this season, but you're not in control of your timelines when you're dealing with graduate school. You're not in control of your timelines. Those standardized tests for admissions happen at set times every year for your LSATs and your MCATs and things like that. You can't just decide, well, I test best at 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. No, that test is going to start at 8 or 9 a.m. no matter how you feel about it. I prefer a balmy 78 degrees in the testing. No, it's going to be 60 degrees in there, no matter how you feel about it. Alignment means that you recognize that there are things that you are not in control of. You have to become adaptable. And you cannot add a bunch of conditions to your commitment. Proverbs 63 reminds us, and this is part of last week, that our plans are only going to stand firm when they are surrendered. When you commit to a task, you must first commit, for me, to God. You have now, if you did the assignment last week, allowed him to dictate to you what deserves your focus, what deserves the capacity that you have, and what you should be focusing your expansion on. But when you haven't committed your ways to Christ, when you haven't decided that you're going to, sorry, I've got a shoe here and my chair is rolling over it. When you haven't committed your plans to Christ, when you haven't actually run your plans by your life to see if it makes sense, then what really ends up happening is everything else in your life becomes urgent the minute you decide to commit to the one thing. It doesn't matter that you've had these friends for years and you guys have always been sporadic and you've hung out occasionally. Now everyone's going to have an emergency. Everybody's going to need you right now. And when you don't show up, you're a bad friend and you never cared about them anyway. Everything in your life, and I'm using this as an example because many of us find it easy to say no to ourselves, but harder to say no to other people. And I will remind you that one of the most important parts of committing to anything in your life is understanding and establishing the boundaries that will keep you in alignment with your goal. You'll bounce from thing to thing. You'll be constantly distracted. You'll feel guilt-tripped and manipulated if you are not surrendered, Because if you're surrendered, you're clear on what your assignment is. If you're clear on what your assignment is, it is far easier to hold your boundaries. There's this story in Nehemiah I love. Nehemiah is rebuilding the wall, and everybody's trying to trick him into quitting because they can't outright attack because he is under the authority of the king of Persia. And so they start all these rumors that they're going to be attacked. And someone who he professes to think in the text is his friend comes to him and says, "Hey, we want to meet with you in the temple. We want to talk to you about this plot against you, the plot against the Israelites to keep them from rebuilding the wall." And Nehemiah says, it's funny because he says the Spirit told him, right? Because he didn't know that this person wasn't his friend. As far as he knew, this person was on the side of the Israelites trying to rebuild the wall. He said, "I will not come down. Anything they need to say to me, they can come up here and they can say it to me." And he finished the wall. There are times in your life where you have to urgently commit every bit of capacity that you have to the one thing you are being called to. Because if you don't do that, then your priorities will never be clear to you. And if your priorities are not clear to you, they won't be clear to anyone else. No one is going to hold a boundary for you. Okay. The next thing is that clarity of purpose kills the urgency-driven chaos. And I've used too many analogies already, but my husband and I used to love this movie, Gone in 60 Seconds. It's a very old, and I'm dating myself, Nicolas Cage movie, where he has basically been hired to steal like 60 cars in 24 hours or something like that. And at the end of the movie, he gets to the bad guy and he's like, "I'm a little bit tired. I'm a little bit wired and I'd like some appreciation." And the guy's like, "You stole a car that wasn't on the list." And it feels like in our lives, we have lists. I talk about this all the time, things that we're supposed to do. And we may go through our entire day and never get to the things on our list because we're getting texts and we're getting emails and we're getting pings. And at work, that can make sense. But that happens even when we are not working. For moms, it feels really bad when you have a list of things to do and you get to the end of the day and you cannot see the progress that you've made. And so alignment means committing your way so that you have such clarity of purpose that you're easily able to discern between the urgent and the necessary, because not everything urgent is necessary. A lack of planning on their part does not always need to mean an emergency on yours. And again, I'm not talking about being ridiculous and, letting the 3-year-old put his own Band-Aid on because mommy's working. I'm talking about all of the many myriad distractions that come up that eat away at our time, 30 minutes at a time, keeping us from our ultimate goals. So it's important to stop reacting and to start moving with focused intention. The second thing is committing to expanding capacity. And this is the most important. It means treating the root and not just the symptoms. Part of what we talked about last week were the places and spaces where we could need to have capacity expanded. Relational capacity, emotional capacity, physical capacity, mental capacity, or spiritual capacity. If you're serious about expanding your capacity, and if you're serious about the assignment that you have in the season, you have to be honest about the real issue that's keeping you from being successful in the space. Why is the capacity that you have not enough, right? And where is your capacity being limited? What is keeping you from being able to do what it is that you need to do? And I have to get real with you. I had to sit down. My therapist asked me this question because I lived in Atlanta for 4 years after undergrad. And I was going to my therapist from about my second year there. And I kept telling her, "Yeah, I'm going to law school. I'm going to law school." She was like, "Did you take the LSAT yet?" And I took the LSAT in 2006, I think. And it was 2008, and I was still talking about, "I'm going to law school, I'm going to law school." Had not applied to the first law school. And she looked at me and she said, "Why? What is the real reason?" She didn't say why. She said, "What is the real reason that you're afraid to apply to law school?" And I had to stop because I was offended at that question because I'm not afraid of anything, right? I'm an adult. I'm going to law school. In my mind, it was never a question that I was going, but I had never considered why I had not yet applied. And I'd been sitting on my scores, which were not bad, for 2 years. When she asked me that, I realized my shortcoming was relational and I was right where I needed to be. Because at the time I was in a relationship and this person had not finished his undergrad degree. And I felt like if I moved too fast, I would leave him behind and I would lose him. And this was it. It sounds absolutely absurd at this point to say it out loud. And I'm now thinking I had the timeline wrong. Yeah, I had the timeline wrong. I had taken my LSATs in 2004, I believe. And so they were, child, don't quote me on it. I'm too old. I don't remember. The bottom line is, I had not wanted to leave this person behind. I had not wanted to move on until they completed, right, their undergraduate degree, because I felt like then there wouldn't be too big of a gap and they would still feel encouraged enough by me to keep moving forward on their goals and dreams. And I was building my life around someone else's decision making that didn't affect me in the least. That person is no longer in my life. And, you know, they were not making the decisions for their life with me in mind. So at that point, I was right where I needed to be, right? Sitting in the therapist chair. Cause I was so ashamed when it finally hit me, because she gave me some journal prompts to actually get to the place of recognition. And I had to go back the next week shamefaced and tell her the reason. I wish I had those journal prompts. That woman was a master. And for anyone who recognizes that this might be you, who heard me say that and said, "Oh my goodness, I've done that." If your shortcoming is relational or if it is emotional, it's something in your spirit, like your family has always talked about you and you have a wound, right? That makes everybody said, "Oh, she thinks she's better than everybody." You have a wound that has not been healed. The answer is not more YouTube shorts. It's not more motivational quotes. It is going to go to therapy. You need a qualified, a licensed clinician to help you to frame it for yourself, because we don't just overcome these things by knowing they exist. We overcome them with the tools that licensed clinicians can help us to use, to not just recognize it, because sometimes we see it, but we make excuses for it. We don't think it's a real problem. We don't understand how it's affecting our lives. So just like if your shortcoming was physical, for those of you who may have realized, I've always wanted to do this, but I'm not in good enough physical health, go see a doctor. Yes. But if your shortcoming is relational or emotional, I recognize that saying talk to a therapist is a privilege. If you do not have the capacity, if you do not have insurance, or you have not been able to get access to a clinician through the insurance you have, I think it's very important to get a journal, to utilize free counseling resources that are available in many communities. When I was in my early 20s, the therapist that I was seeing was free to me because of a trauma that I had experienced in childhood. And so there are programs available, but even if you find that you cannot find anything and you do not qualify, again, that was 2004, and programs and funding has been cut significantly. I recognize the privilege of that time. There are journals and there are workbooks available. There are journals and workbooks available on rejection for those who have a childhood wound. There are journals, and I recommend the Nora, what is her name? I'm afraid I'm going to say the name, Nona Jones, The Gift of Rejection. Amazing read. And it's very helpful to help you understand how childhood wounds about who you were and how you showed up cause you to reshape yourself and not live in your full capacity and live within the identity that you were created to. I recommend a shadow work notebook if you have dealt with domestic violence, abuse, any type of those childhood betrayals that really leave trauma, mental illness, any type of abuse, financial, sexual. Again, first option is a licensed clinician. I understand that's from a place of privilege. If you cannot get one, get a workbook, work through the workbook, not just a book. not shorts on social media, a workbook. There are workbooks written by licensed clinicians that have a lot. I'm sure my therapist had graduated. I think she was still getting her master's when she started meeting with me. She was using someone else's workbook and she was giving me the homework and it still worked. So these resources are available. It's important to use them. If your shortcoming, though, is mental, ask yourself, where is my time actually going? Because we talked last week about a mental capacity being the inability to focus. You find that you have knowledge gaps. You're not really sure where to start. But let's be real, ChatGPT, Google, the librarians who are absolutely fabulous and can probably refer you to a book on any subject exist. So if you decided that your shortcoming was mental, that you don't have the time, focus, attention span, or information, then you really have to ask yourself, how am I spending my time? Addiction is not about things that are inherently evil. Most people are addicted to things that are comfortable, that are enjoyable, real, shorts, games, apps. These things are engineered to shrink your attention span. I've talked about it before. Studies confirm it, but our lives prove it. If you can't stay focused for more than 20 minutes or 30 minutes on your job without pulling out your phone, that's a problem. Admit it to yourself, get help. Set your app limits. Delete some of those apps and games. Use your do not disturb like your life depends on it, because it does. But also, for anyone dealing with any of these issues, I still recommend, if you have the privilege to have access, talk to a therapist. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. Qualified counsel is important. The scriptures alone say there's wisdom, there's safety in Proverbs 11. There is safety in a multitude of counsel. So the last shortcoming is spiritual. If your shortcoming is spiritual, it's probably also tied to distraction. If you struggled with last week's assignment because you couldn't stop hearing your own voice in your head and you never felt like you got an answer from God on what it is that you are supposed to be doing in this season, what your assignment should be, where you should be attempting to increase your capacity, because every time you went to pray, you found yourself dozing off or your mind wandering off. But here's the truth. Commitment to capacity requires confronting the root. If your spiritual capacity is keeping you from hearing the voice of God, you need to go to the root. And the root is Isaiah 59:2, where we have unconfessed, unrepented sin. Our sins have separated us from God. We're not hearing his voice. It's time to get back into your word. It's time to start on your knees. It's time to say, God, I'm addicted to my phone. Let me tell you something. God has been tapping me on my shoulder through my husband, but also just on his own for years about my phone. And just in the last year, I started really using app limits, and I deleted pretty much everything that I was using on my phone. And I recognized how much time I was wasting. If you have, I don't know if all phones have this, but my phone has this little thing where it shows you how much time you're spending every day in every app, in every area. And I had not realized how much time I was spending on my gaming and social media apps until last year. And I was able to take that down from about 6 hours a day, if you can believe it, to less than 2. And many of us use our phones for work. I spent a lot more time in my productivity apps. It's true. But how many things could we do with those 3 hours, those 4 hours, those 6 hours that we're frittering away watching someone else's life? Commitment to capacity expansion requires confronting the root. Healing doesn't come by ignoring your symptoms. It comes by facing them head on. You can't go over it. You can't go under it. You can't go around it. You have to go through it. And if you choose to try to avoid the problem and bulldoze your way through to the capacity that you need, you will find yourself back where you started. We don't have to do it alone, though. God promises us. I love the word of God. It said, you will have good success. I think that's in Joshua. That means we can go to God first. We can ask for his wisdom. We can seek his faith. and then faithfully pursue daily the habits that we need. It takes, most people say it takes between 21 and 66 days to form a habit. And I've told you guys this probably 24 times, but I have ADHD. And for me, if I stop doing something for 1 or 2 days, it's like it never happened. Even if I've done it for 6 months before that, I have to physically remember to do simple, simple things. And it can be very frustrating when you find yourself derailed to decide, I'm going to start from the beginning and I'm going to be very intentional. I'm going to document whatever it is that you use to get your habit started. You have to be willing to humble yourself and do that again. You have to be willing to go back to the beginning. And you have to recognize that when you do that, you are investing in yourself, because commitment to capacity requires confronting the root. If we choose our healing, if we commit to making sure that everything in our life aligns with our stated goal, and if we are sure that that goal is our purpose in this season, we will faithfully expand our capacity. And what does that mean? That means we will get everything that we need for the assignment that we have. You will have it. No one can take it from you. So a reflection question that I want you to think about: if you have already gotten to what your assignment, what your purpose, what your one goal is that you need to increase your capacity to accomplish in this season, your reflection question for this week is: what in your life is bringing you out of alignment with the person you need to be to effectuate that goal? What is it that you're doing that feels urgent, but may not be necessary and is keeping you from what you've been asked or what you've asked God for in this season? That's the assignment. If you can identify at least 2 areas that have been a distraction for you, and focus and commit to healing in those areas. For me, over the past 2 years, I asked for capacity, and I have to be honest, to help me address my weight. And I was, guys, and I've talked about this before, I was completely delulu. I thought that, I was eating healthily, and, I cook most of my meals. I thought, I'm a healthy eater. I just need to exercise more, right? And so I'm doing all this walking. I'm starting to go to the gym. During the pandemic, I lost a bunch of weight, and then life happened and I put it back on. And I finally said, you know what? I'm going to go see a nutritionist. Why? We take the help from the store. And when I went to see the nutritionist, she reminded me, where is the book? I had it. She reminded me that I needed to be writing down everything I was eating. And this, I brought this out specifically for this lesson. This is a food journal that I started in 2012, guys. The first time that I lost the weight, because I had a condition that was keeping me from being able to have kids, and I needed to lose weight to deal with that. And I went to this doctor, and he gave me this little book, and I had to write down all my meals. And you're not going to be able to see it. It's not going to come into focus, but just know the pages of this are filled with the foods that I was eating. And she said, "Are you keeping a food journal?" And I was like, I've seen that book around here somewhere. And I rummaged in my desk drawers and I pulled it out, and I was like, I have one. I haven't written in it since. And I think the date was like March of 2017. And I was embarrassed, but she said, I need you to document your food. If you can't write it in a book, that's fine. Get an app. And I'd had my Fitness Pal for, again, 12, 15 years. But the same thing, if I go 2 days without doing something that I've done every day for a year, it's like I never did it. I started documenting my food, and I realized losing weight is a numbers game. I was eating far too much, far more than I would burn. And any dietitian will tell you this. You eat a cookie, it's more than you burn in 2 hours on an elliptical. They'll break it down for you in ways that are extremely deeply painful. And you start thinking to yourself, is it worth it? And the reason you're thinking that is because the issue is not the food. The issue is how you feel about the food, right? And I had to admit, and I talked to you guys about this on my page too, that I worked with someone who talked about food addiction. And I realized I had to reframe all of my thought process around food. So my weight wasn't just a physical thing. It was affecting my physical health, but it was also a mental thing. It was also an emotional thing. And for me, it became a spiritual thing because it was something that was standing between me and a goal that I had. And that was to be temperate in all things. Y'all aren't ready for this. And I'm not going, this is not everybody's ministry. This wasn't my ministry 10 years ago. You got to be in the season and it has to be your assignment. But just know this: if there is anything that you have as your assignment and you're not willing to evaluate what in your life is not in alignment with it, you will not have good success. You must be honest and commit it all and be willing to lay down anything that is coming between you and your assignment in this season. That is commitment. That is the path to the capacity that you need for the assignment that you will have. Next week is going to be our last week on this topic. And I want you guys to understand, even though the last week of the month is actually August 30th or July 30th, next week is going to be our last week on capacity. And I'm taking off that next week because I'm taking my oldest son to college. But we're going to talk about implementation under the topic, don't quit. Because commitment first requires alignment. But many of us live in a space where if we do not see immediate results, if everything in our life does not shift when we make the sacrifices and make the hard decisions, we want to give up. So we set arbitrary limits. Oh, I'm going to give it 3 months. I'm going to give it 6 months. I'm going to give it 9 months if I don't see a difference. Next week, we're talking about what happens when you go all in on increasing your capacity towards your goal, how to not quit, and some structures that each one of us can put into place to make sure that when we have, and I'm going to give you a little preview now, told other people, right, accountability, that we're going to do something, that we're able to stick to that promise. Because we have to be accountable to God and ourselves, but many of us require, right, accountability to other people to actually, we're like, well, if I'm the only person that knows in God, then, nobody's going to be disappointed. No, you disappoint yourself. You disappoint yourself. And many of us have disappointed ourselves so many times that we have no credit with ourselves. We're going to talk about how to rebuild that next week under the topic, don't quit. Do your assignment this week. Look for things that seem urgent, that are pulling you out of alignment with the goal that you know that you are supposed to have in this season. And remember, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. Choose wisely. I hope that you have a wonderful evening, and I hope that you'll be back for part 4 and our last part of how to increase your capacity next week at 9 p.m. Good night.